leadership and other stuff. Brian Houston, obviously, is my name, and I want to talk today about churches, and I'm speaking specifically to church founders, church pioneers, senior pastors, lead pastors. We'll just call them head pastors sometimes because some churches senior pastor, others are lead pastor. But I really want to talk about church governance and things I've learned over the years. I have been on committees, boards, executives, in ministries and in churches for well over 50 years. I became a pastor, a youth pastor. It was a voluntary role in a small church after Bible college. I was just 19 years of age. I think I turned 20 during that time. And I was on I was on that church. Wainuiomata AOG, Assemblies of God. I was on that church's board. And from there, after a little while, I was in another relatively small Assemblies of God church in South Auckland in New Zealand. I was a youth pastor again, and again it was a voluntary role, but I was on the church board. I've been on boards, executives, and committees for a long time, about 53 years to be precise. So I do have experience, and I have watched both firsthand and from a distance the way boards function. And I think it's so important. Speaking to young pastors, any pastors who are right now pioneering or planting a church, the setup of the governance of your church, I cannot stress enough how important it is. So Galatians chapter 1, Paul speaking, verse 1 and 2. He's going to go on and bring a lot of correction in the book of Galatians to religious leaders, people who are trying to bring things back to law and legalism. And he starts like this. He says, this letter is from Paul, an apostle. I was not appointed, I think this is interesting, I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father who raised Jesus from the dead. All the brothers and sisters here join me in sending this letter to the churches of Galatia. He's making a point. It wasn't just an introduction to the chapter and to the book of Galatians, his letter to the Galatians. No, he's making a point. He says, I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father. So it's true. Oftentimes when you plant, you pioneer, Bobby and I, we started planting in our 20s. I planted, before Hillsong, I planted a church in 1980 here in Australia in a place called the Central Coast, and pastored that for some time. It had a great start, started to grow, and we brought in a couple to pastor it. They pastored it for 17 years, 1981. So by then I was about 27, Bobby was 24. We did the same thing again in an area southwest of Sydney. Same thing. Church started to grow. It was going well. We brought in a couple who I knew, and they took the church on and pastored it for decades. And both those churches became strong churches. Today, they have their own buildings and facilities and run all sorts of fantastic programs. And so, 1983, I was 29. Bobby was 26. We started Hills Christian Life Centre, which is what became known as Hillsong Church. And so, even after that, we kept on planting churches. I planted churches with my team, different parts of Sydney, at different times, and of course over the years we planted churches all over the globe, all over the world. So I've planted a lot of churches. I'm not just showing off about look at me, look what I've done. What I am saying is I know the importance of setting up the right governance in planting a church. And Paul's saying you weren't there. None of you were there. I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father. They weren't there yet. And so it's amazing how leaders get to a point where others are controlling them. And that's really what I want to talk about. Before I even start, pastors, lead pastors, senior pastors, head pastors need accountability. But who you're accountable to is really what I think is important. So over the last few years in particular, so many people have come to me. I'm talking about people who were pastors of churches, maybe small churches, often large churches, and their heartbreak stories when it relates to their treatment from church boards. And there are times when pastors, specifically lead pastors, have to be dealt with in terms of the future and their position, especially where there is immorality or where perhaps there's doctrinal problems, false teaching, or maybe mistreating people, abusing people, bullying people, whatever. And so, yes, every pastor needs accountability. What I'm addressing is not that. What I'm addressing is who you are accountable to. And it all comes down to the way you set your church up. I think it's so critical. It might not affect you today. It might not affect you tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years. But believe me, it may affect you in the decades to come, in the long term. So it's just my practical advice. You may agree, you may disagree. That's fine. That's what really this is all about, podcasts. That's what they're all about. But the first question people will ask is, who keeps the pastor accountable? But I want to ask you a different question. We'll answer that question, but I want to ask you a different question. Who keeps church boards accountable? There are many great church boards out there. They're serving, they're doing a wonderful job, their hearts are pure, they are in an inspiring way, elevating the vision of the lead pastor and the ministry, and they're doing a great job, usually unheralded. They don't want the public eye. They're not even looking for that. They're not strutting around, getting their esteem from the positions that they have. No, they're just faithfully serving. Thank God for them. But sadly, oftentimes, when we can assume that all church boards have pure motives, it's just often not the way. As I'm speaking, I'm just talking about 50 years of experience. I added to what I already said. I was basically on denominational executives for up to 30 years at every level, district level, state level, national, federal level. And for most of those years, I was leading those executives. And so in doing so, I was the chairman of the board. And not only that, but also in those positions, I had to work with many church boards. There are 1,100 churches nationally in what then was the Assemblies of God in Australia. It's still associated with the Assemblies of God internationally, but it's now called Australian Christian Churches. And so I had to work with boards specifically about issues relating to their pastors. So just giving some context, listen to what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 to 22. And Bobby was preaching about this on Jesus Followers just the last time she spoke. It says, I hope and trust, Paul obviously speaking, I hope and trust, he's speaking to the Philippians, in the Lord Jesus, soon to send Timothy to you, so that I may also be encouraged and cheered by learning news of you. For I have no one like him. There is no one like Timothy. In brackets in the Amplified, it says, no one of so kindred a spirit. Man, when you find people like that and you work with people like that in every area, every level of church life, from the governance and the management all the way through. I'm telling you, that's where unity is, that's where momentum comes from, it's where blessing comes from. No one of so kindred a spirit, who will be so genuinely interested in, talking to the Philippians, your welfare, not his welfare, not even Paul's welfare, your welfare. Finding my spot. He'll be so genuinely interested in your welfare and devoted to your interests. Now listen, for the others all seek to advance their own interests. Is that a problem? Is that an issue often with church leaders, specifically those who serve in the governance of a church? Listen to it again. For the others all seek to advance their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. But Timothy tested worth you know. But Timothy's tested worth you know. How as a son with his father, he has toiled with me zealously in serving and helping to advance. He was there helping serve, and advance is a great word, taking the ministry forward. And so serving and helping to advance the good news. So I think we can make a mistake. I think we can think, and again, I've talked about boards generally and so many wonderful people serving, and I'm certainly not speaking about you at all. But I think a question to be asked of church boards, the governance of a church, is the best interests of the congregation their greatest priority? Because sadly, from all I've observed and seen over a long period of time, it's often not their top priority. There are so many agendas and motives that can come into boards that end up in heartbreaking stories, and I'll just give you some of them. The first one is self-preservation. That's right. In a situation where maybe there's disunity and the board themselves under attack, and maybe the board made missteps and they should resign. But the first thing they're going to do is protect themselves. So, in protecting themselves, self-preservation, that is a big motivation that is less than putting the congregation first and really wanting the best interests of the people, of the ministry. I'll just read them and then I'll maybe go through and comment a little bit. First one, self-preservation. Second one is offences on the people there that are on that board, maybe getting offended with the pastor. And when you pastor a long time anywhere, hopefully you have phenomenal relationship. I mean, Bobby and I, we had decades where our key team stayed together, not for a year, 2 years, 5 years, decades, where so many of our wonderful department heads and key team stayed together. But amongst all of that, you get people who get offended. And I'll tell you, when someone gets offended, their spirit changes. Maybe they were once generous, maybe they were once full of faith. They become mean-spirited. And it reflects in the way they're dealing with situations, and specifically the way they're dealing with people. Personal ambition, that's a big one. I'll get back to it. Self-preservation, offences, personal ambition, and maybe a very big one is control. And there is one more, self-righteousness. I talked about self-preservation. Basically, you're going to look after yourself. That's human nature, and throw someone else under the bus. Second one is offences. I said about that already. When someone is offended, their spirit is changed. They're affected, and it will impact their judgment, and especially when it comes to their judgments on other people. And so the third one, personal ambition. Has everyone in the room, has everyone in this room, has anyone in that room declared that they are going to potentially, personally gain a promotion, a new title, cementing you in your role, whatever it is? Personal ambition, it cannot be there when it comes to addressing issues that relate to dealing with the lead or head pastor. And so the next one's control. That's a big one. Controlling the assets, control of the organisation and the ministry. A lot comes with that. I think I already mentioned how people, their esteem can get caught up in it. And it's very alluring, especially if there's lots of assets, for people to want to control. Sadly, I think you've got to be looking at these things and asking yourself the questions about whether that's potential danger. And I mentioned the last one, self-righteousness. Man, just people generally, Christians generally, self-righteousness. It's amazing how we judge other people with a different standard than we judge ourselves. So a lot of hypocrisy comes into that as well. So think about those things, and then maybe after all of that, I'm up to number 6, the best interests of the congregation. Because this is not about the best interests of the board. It's about the best interests of the people. That's right, the church. And today's juggle is this. There's a need for corporate governance. It's 2026. And in different countries, there's different regulatory bodies and different levels of accountability and responsibility, but you can't avoid it. It's true. And so you have to have people in place who are committed to proper governance, due diligence, sometimes saving us from ourselves. We need to have those people in place. And you got to add to that, juggle that with what the Bible says. Is your church's board opening the Bible and using it when it comes to very significant decisions? Or is it all corporate? This is the corporate expectations. This is the corporate understanding. And so I'm just stimulating thought. The two can coexist. In fact, I think they need to coexist. Governance and Bible, New Testament, church, leadership, example. So I think, honestly, that good governance comes from people who are serving, not people who are controlling. Good governance is coming from people who are serving the ministry and the vision. The moment that becomes control, everything changes. Just watch my hands. So here, my palm, my fingers are pointing upwards. And this is the vision of the church. This is the ministry. This is the leadership of the church. And you get a board with servant hearts, and they are all about elevating the ministry, the leadership, the vision. They want to see their pastors excel. They want to see their pastors doing well. I can name people over all the years who had that spirit when it comes to Bobby and I. And so they are content to lead like that. What happens when you go from a board-governed church to a board-controlled church? Oftentimes, that's what happens. All of a sudden, and the pressure changes. Now the pressure's pushing things downwards ultimately. And that can come with anything as simple as change of leadership in a board. It can come in various different ways. I'll say it one more time. Huge difference between a board-governed church and a board-controlled church. And once a board decides they take control, you'll see it. You'll see it. You'll see it in different ways. And you will understand then, the senior pastor is in charge as long as he doesn't step out of line with the board. He's in charge. Listen to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 20 and 21. Talking about the church specifically. Having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, there's a metaphor of a building here, being fitted together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord, having been built. People say, well, Jesus builds his church, and they use it as a way to basically say, well, it's not you, it's Jesus who builds his church. Let me just say it right now. I've never seen Jesus opening the doors on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. I've never seen Jesus playing the keyboard, leading the worship. I've never even seen Jesus preaching the sermon. Hopefully the sermon is exalting Jesus, but he's always used people. The church is built. Jesus builds his church. How does he build it? Having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. So he's the chief cornerstone. Everything else builds on that, but he uses people, and he has always used people. And I think that is important. And not just anybody. Jesus uses specific people. That's right, he appoints specific people. I will share some scriptures and build on that a little more in just a moment. But I just honestly believe you can't underestimate the impact of apostolic ministry. Sometimes it has a prophetic edge. Oftentimes you will see so many of the qualifications in the ministry gifts, apostles, pastors, evangelists, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, and, apostles, prophets. Those are the people in the New Testament who Jesus said he would build his church on. So Paul, for example, Paul was a tent maker, but that wasn't his qualification for being a church leader, pioneer, writing the epistles. No, that wasn't his qualification, that he was a tent maker. His qualification was that he was an apostle. He was anointed by the church leaders at that time to be an apostle. And so Peter's another example, because Peter, Jesus said to him very specifically, your name is Peter. Listen carefully, not Peter, Paul, or Mary. Your name is Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. No, I don't believe he was the first pope. No, I don't. However, he was the first apostle in the Jerusalem church. He was the one out there preaching, evangelizing, ministering, leading. And so, your name is Peter. And on that rock, that little pebble, because Jesus is the rock, I will build my church. There it is again. Build my church. So yes, Jesus builds his church, but he's going to use Paul, and he's going to use Peter. And today, he's still using people in the building of his church. Jesus builds his church. It's sort of a throw-off, dismissive line. So it's not you, it's Jesus. And so, as true as it is, Jesus builds his church. It's not a complete statement. And we need to understand that and not fall into the trap of then thinking, oh, it's never about men, because Jesus has always used people. So, when I think about an apostle, I think of someone who is pioneering. It's a biblical example. Planting, pioneering, churches all over the then known world, missionary journeys, planting churches, pioneering churches, instructing churches, correcting churches. That was the role of an apostle. And then sending, pioneering, sending out people, again, to all over the then known world. Pioneering, sending, overseeing. That's right. Who's overseeing your church? Because it's the apostolic ministry in the scriptures with the prophetic that is overseeing the church. Just leading. That's not a biblical word, that's my word. Although I think in many translations of the New Testament you will find the word lead and leading. But it's keeping the church, the team, the believers on track. And I'm just talking about the roles of the apostolic ministry, whether it's spiritually or doctrinally, or when it comes to mission and vision, prophetic edge. I know for us, when we were pastors at Hillsong Church. We were a very missional church. That's right. We had a mission that we set way back at the beginning, and that was to reach and influence the world by building a large, Christ-centered, Bible-based church, changing mindsets and empowering people to lead and impact in every sphere of life. And so, yes, we were a missional church, but we served that mission with a vision. In 1993, the story's kind of legendary inside our world. I sat down at my desk and just dreamed and talked about the church that I see and penned it. And miraculously over the next 20 years, rather than just an outrageous vision that was way out there, it became a description of Hillsong Church. And so, huge believer in vision. And so, this is the apostles. They bring vision. They often bring that prophetic edge, which I think is oftentimes in that vision. There's a prophetic edge to it. I believe there's a prophetic edge to the church that I see, that we had all over our walls and in the foyers, and we put in front of people in so many different ways. And then after all of that, you've got the saints, the people. That's right, the believers. And they're all in ministry. When it talks about apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, it's for what? The building of the saints, the maturing, the building of the people for the work of the ministry. So it's not just apostles and prophets that are in ministry. Everybody is in ministry. And so that means with apostolic anointing especially, that people are killing it. They're excelling in whatever is in front of them. And it's their ministry. It's a kingdom business, or it's all about God's purposes, calling and purpose. And so when I think about that, they're either nailing it in business or in the corporate world or in hospitality or maybe the professions, the various professions or trades in medical, technical. I'm just listing a few. Music, entertainment. You can just keep going on and on and on. But for a believer, it's your ministry. It's not just your job. It's not just your job. It's your ministry. So all believers, I believe, are called to ministry, but not all believers are called to leadership. Church leadership, that is. Sorry, everyone's called to leadership. Church leadership, governance. Basically, I just don't believe that whether it's builders and plumbers and electricians, or whether it's accountants or lawyers or doctors or anyone else, I don't believe that those people are the people spiritually equipped with the ministry gifting to actually control churches. Yes, they bring governance, but it's a serving role. I think it's, are they elders? Are the board elders? Like if we look at it biblically, there may be elders on the board, but I'll tell you what the Bible says about elders, not just some elders, elders. Elders are apt to teach, and they are shepherds. They pastor, and they can teach the Bible. And so people with gift of teaching and people who are committed to and maybe have the gift of pastoring, loving and caring for the people, that's qualifications for elders. Now, we can call a group elders. I've done it. We can call group elders, but are they really elders in the true biblical sense? Are board elders? Well, I'll say it one more time. There may be elders on the board, but a board's a serving position. And I'm very, very adamant about that. So biblically, are they elders? Are they deacons? Deacons are servants. So in Acts chapter 6, there were disputes arising in the church, and they made adjustments, which was fantastic, and they put in place the kind of people, deacons, who would look after, wait on the tables, and do all those things that released the ministry, the apostles and the prophets, to prayer and to do what God's called them to do. And I just believe boards are a serving ministry. They're not a controlling ministry. They are a serving ministry. So I'm closer to deacons than elders. If you're just talking about a church board who are dealing with issues of, like I say, true governance, proper governance, dealing with the various regulatory bodies, whatever it is, it's a deacon role. And so a lot of wisdom and advice and counsel in the Bible for these people: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, bishops, elders, deacons. But I'm not just trying to push down church boards, and hopefully you'll get the spirit of that. But there's no advice for a board or a committee, because they're just not biblical roles. They're corporate roles. We have to have them. And depending on the world where you are, there's various rules for that. But I'll move on. So I asked, who keeps the board? Who keeps the board accountable? Think about this for a minute. Can the congregation have any input or say into appointing the board? I'm not commenting on what should be, what shouldn't be. I'm just asking you a question. Should they, and do they? Do the congregation have any say whatsoever on who are members of the board? So if not, a board's not actually accountable to a congregation. They may bring a report, but in reality, it's not the congregation who hire and fire them. And they can fire the pastor. And if they're in a position where they can fire the pastor, then the senior pastor, lead pastor, head pastor, he's not the person, or she's not the person who ultimately can fire them. I think how it works often is a head pastor will maybe talk about the people they'd love to see on the board, and that either gets accepted or rejected, but that doesn't mean that he has power over the board. The congregation don't. The lead pastor does. So who doesn't? The lead pastor doesn't. So who actually does? Think about it for a minute. They're a lord of themselves. And so that can kind of get very incestuous. So that's why my question. People are quick to say, who keeps the pastor accountable? It's a question I'll address. And this is starting to get long, so I may have to do a part 2 to this. Who keeps the board accountable? Put it out there. Have a look at it in your neck of the woods, your scenario, and just start. Now, if you can answer that easily, but I think oftentimes, boards are a lord of themselves. There's a church here. I'm in Australia right now. There's a church here in Australia that I'm aware of, and they had to deal with an issue with the senior pastor. I don't think necessarily that they had any choice in the way they handled that particular issue, although they shouldn't have been the ones, in my opinion, making the decisions. But then after that, they have just never ever appointed another pastor. They decided and I talked about control, a bid for control. They decided they're going to lead the church themselves. And so these guys are tradesmen. I don't know exactly what they do, but they're tradesmen. And I'm sure they're probably very good tradesmen. And they're possibly even very good believers and Christians. But that's not the qualification for leading a church. And so it can kind of get crazy if we don't have things in place that keeps a board accountable. And one of the things that you'll see that is a telltale sign when a board goes from this to this is they'll start putting policy in place that starts to shrink or limit the authority of the pastor, the senior pastor, the lead pastor. Sure sign that you're going from a board governed church to a board controlled church. Who do I think should be or what do I think should be the makeup of a board? I'm going to go on to that next time round. Who or what do I think should decide the makeup of the church board? In other words, who's on the board? The people on the board. Join me next time, because I'm going to have a part 2 to this. And all I'm doing, really, I want to remind you, is I'm talking to church planters, pioneers, founders, whether you've just started a year ago or you're a long-term founder of a church. And I'm talking to you about protecting yourself, ultimately, and your position, because God appointed you. Paul said it already. There was no man or human authority when he was called to be an apostle. So, one last time to make sure you understand, I think pastors do need to be accountable. The question I'm going to address, and in my opinion answer, is who should make vital decisions about the head pastor. So join me next time. It gets exciting. Thanks so much for joining me. Leadership and other stuff. Subscribe, put a like in there. I watch a lot of sports podcasts. They always say that. So push the subscribe button, put a like in there. And so, yeah, I want to see this. I love speaking to leaders, and I think God's graced me for it. So join me again. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.